everybody, and welcome to the February meeting of the Library Marketing Book Club. It's so nice to see everybody here. Hope you're all doing well today, and super excited today to have always so awesome when we have an author, and even better when we have an author in the library world and a library themed book. So today, very, very excited to have Mark Aaron Polger with us. Mark is an academic librarian. He is the coordinator of library outreach at College of Staten Island, CUNY. He is currently on sabbatical, but that is where he is when he is librarying. This is Mark's second book. So we had Mark on before, early on, when we talked about library marketing basics. And if you haven't read that book, please do. It's an awesome, awesome book. And you can actually go back and see that conversation on the website for the book club. So that was great. I know this is going to be great. Mark is a PhD candidate. So yeah, Mark has that book, the first book, and then Mark has this second book. And we're very, very excited to talk to Mark about library signage and wayfinding design and library marketing and any other questions that you have. If you do have a camera, please pop it on. We'd love to see faces as we go through this conversation. And during the meeting, if you have any questions for Mark, just jump on in. You can use the raise hand. You can just get some attention. Again, it's a nice big group. So however you can use some attention. You can also use the chat. I will try to monitor the chat while I can. But if you have something in the chat or see something in the chat that you want to get on, please do that. And we'll just go through. I'll go through some things that I have, but I also look forward to hearing everybody. But thank you very much, Mark. And Mark, if you would like to say hello, that would be great.
Hi, thank you all for coming this afternoon to talk about signage and, how to make signage better. And this really relates to many, many, many years of trying to improve the signage in my library and, doing a lot of different audits and really evaluating the current signage and just how awful it is, at least in my library, and trying to make improvements by spending as least money as possible. So really a lot of what I'm writing about in the book is really a lot of DIY, basically not, trying to do everything on a shoestring budget. And I think that's the theme of the book. So I'm very glad that you're all interested in having a nice, lively discussion about how to make signage better.
That's great. And Mark, I first saw this presentation at Library Marketing Communications conference about 7 or 8 years ago. And I thought it was just, I first saw you do a presentation on this book and this topic back then. It was absolutely fantastic. And, I see that there's a lot of, updates through the book. And so I will do what we've done other times, and I will throw it open to the group for first to start. So what does anybody have? Feedback, questions? What'd you think of the book?
Anyone?
Like a teacher, I will pause until somebody says something.
I guess I'll jump in.
Great.
I loved the book. I was actually just kind of like, I saw what the book was going to be for the upcoming month, and I was like, oh, I need to get this book about library signage. And I was chatting with my coworker, and she reached to her desk, and she's like, oh, you mean this one? And so she had already read it and has started doing some of the things. I had already seen her sign audit. So I'm like, okay, we're ahead of the ball. So it was nice to actually read the book for myself. And we've been having conversations about signage and first impressions and user experience. So I found it to be really, really useful. Gleaned a lot of things from it.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Angie. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very happy. Unfortunately, ALA cut half the book out. That's really upset me. I
Oh,
wrote the book was double the size, and I
Wow.
obviously didn't properly read my contract, so the book is pretty small, and yeah. I would have written much more, but ALA cut half. So it's a very slim book, pretty easy read. And I'm glad that you found it useful. I mean, that's the whole point, really should be practical, and that, anybody can do a signage audit, as long as you're passionate about, making the library a nicer place, really improving the user experience. Lori has a question about part 2. I do have a book contract. I'm working on my 4th book. But it's not, it's actually it's a part 2 of Library Marketing Basics. Library Marketing Basics was my 2019 book, which is really about, just looking at, the traditional aspects of different library marketing activities, from the start of like doing market research to the whole, to kind of developing a campaign. So my part 2, which is I'm in contract right now for another book, and this is book number 4, is library marketing in response to COVID. So really looking more at online library marketing activities in kind of, and how libraries pivoted in response to COVID. So it's not really about signage. I'm sorry, but it's more broadly about how we changed our library marketing activities in response to COVID. The only problem is I'm also working on my dissertation, so it's really difficult to kind of balance the dissertation, which is like very theoretically informed, and then like a book, which is a little bit more practical in nature. So it has been difficult because the two projects are not really connected. So, but there is a part 2.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And I see other comments in there about Joey saying we have no signage budget, no budget after remodel after last year. And yeah, that's part of the book too, is talks about so yeah, Mark, in one part of the book, I'll just skip into where chapter 3, where you were talking about a case where a signage vendor gave a quote to a library for $25,000 to replace all their signs in 1994. $25,000 was a lot of money in 94. It's a lot of money now. And the way that you all got through that group got through that, not you, but I don't think that was yours, but the group that got through that was prioritizing directional signage and removing handwritten signs, and then knocking that down to a cost of about $5,000. So, Mark, as you've gone through and obviously in the book and cases like this, yeah, I mean, it sounds like you definitely have seen ways where people can do things very economically because it's something that we all face.
Oh, definitely. And also that some signs are, you have to constantly revisit your signs and constantly update them.
Yeah.
But, some signs are a little bit more permanent, so they're not, going to change as often. But, there's nothing worse than, outdated signs and signs that really have a very, angry, punitive message. So I think that, it's making small changes, and those changes don't have to be expensive. And, no, you're right that permanent signs become invisible. I think when I'm thinking about permanent signs, I'm thinking a lot about, wayfinding, unless the whole building changes.
Right.
Wayfinding is a little bit more permanent, because unless you change the whole building, and so I think that wayfinding just helps people make sure they don't get lost, that they can exit a building and enter a building and navigate through a building. But, so I think signs become invisible when there's too many signs.
Right.
That's when there's, and I've gone to libraries where there's an explosion of signs, not literal explosion, obviously, but, where it's just, it's chaos. And we call that, visual noise, where it's so overwhelming that it really causes, either like panic or, really increases library anxiety. So, a few signs, that's all you need. You don't need to have, an overabundance of signs. Just a few would be effective. And based on market research, I work in academic libraries, so students love big signs. So, based on the data that you get, depends on your users. Our users, mostly students, they love big signs, so, that means that for us, 24 by 36, which are poster size, that seems to be, effective. We do have some signs that are 8 by 10, but, our users don't like 8 by 10 signs, so, and someone had mentioned QR codes.
Yeah.
I used to think QR codes were a fad. They were, temporary, but we use them, and we have fully embraced them, and they are amazing. And they are not only coming back, but, they should definitely be embraced, and they're very, very good way of tracking your signs, especially digital signs, because when someone clicks on a QR code, sometimes the QR code, if it's a permanent QR code, you can track, how many clicks there are. So that's also very useful for assessment purposes, especially to try to figure out who is engaging in your digital signs, right? Specifically digital signs, because that's a whole other discussion, talking about digital signs. So
yeah, there's a lot in the book about that too. And somebody, is it Michaela? I don't know how to say your name. Michaela, I think it's Michaela. Talks about just doing the inventory and looking to start the audit. And I know you talk a lot about in the book about audits, and talks about, would you recommend using a committee? And I remember in the book there was some talk about different places using a committee. And Mark, how, what have you seen and what have you done as far as who becomes a part of a committee? What kind of things do you look for? What kind of things have you heard are successful in committees when designing signs?
I think a small group is what I recommend, not like not too many people. But I think people who are just very interested, you don't have to, you don't have to be a librarian. You don't have to be a library marketer. It's any person who works in the library, who cares about signage, who cares about communication, who cares about our users. Now, some of my colleagues, don't care as much, so I think it's really about, you want to be able to really care about really promoting a user experience. I want to talk about user experience because that's very much what my book is really themed about, user experience. We want to be able to create, emotionally and psychologically positive experiences with our users. So that's why, you have to be careful with the signage. So I always think, like, read the signs out loud. How do they sound? Because a lot of us want to be, we want to be funny, we want to be sarcastic. That doesn't always work, so sarcasm and, being humorous doesn't always work. So it's better to be friendly and to be casual, and also to try to create a sign with as least words as possible, right? If there's too many words, maybe it doesn't belong on a sign. Maybe it belongs on a brochure. Maybe it belongs on a website and doesn't belong on a sign. So I think that, and I'm seeing the thread about QR codes. Definitely. You would use QR codes if you think that, there's too many words to put on a sign, put the QR code, which would link to a website, which would have, maybe a larger body of text. Right? So that's really good for a QR code, to direct the user to, a larger body of language. But ideally your sign shouldn't have any more than 5 words. We don't need, I've seen ridiculous. We had like this code of conduct, which looks like, I'm telling you, I joke in the book, looks like the US Constitution. That's not a sign. That's not a sign. A sign is not supposed to have, it's not supposed to be like like an essay or something. So but yeah, so I'm really connecting a lot of the themes that I talk about user experience, because we want to make sure that our users feel welcome and they feel that they're being welcome, that it's a friendly environment. Did I?
Yeah.
Hopefully I didn't go off topic. I want to make sure I'm
No,
addressing
that's
your
great.
question.
No, it's certainly popular. That's what people are talking about in QR codes and signs. And I love that, Mark. I think that's fantastic. That idea of, just a few words on your signs and then lead people to more. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. It's something that you only have so much space. And yeah, the more signs, more words, more things you're putting in front of people. And like you mentioned, the library is already kind of a confusing and an intimidating experience for a lot of
For sure.
people.
Yeah.
Especially when you talk about academic and they're like, oh God, I got to do all this research. I got to do all that.
Mhm.
So yeah, you want to make sure that it's this welcoming environment.
Right.
Kirsten, who actually won a copy of your book for this, Kirsten says, how do I go about talking to my branch managers who want flyers for everything? So a very common thing. They have small branches, 8 across the district. They want a flyer for every program, every service. And it's overload, especially when they want to post those. Mark, how do you suggest approaching like delivering program information? So a little beyond, a little in a different way than wayfinding program information through signage.
I'm all about using different modalities and different types of content for different things. And as a teacher, I know that some students hate textbooks, and they hate reading, which is crazy because I teach, I teach in a university and I teach graduate students, so it's ridiculous. But my solution is, why not offer, choices for accessing different kinds of content. So for program information, you have the website, you have a calendar, you have a print calendar, you have an online calendar. Yeah, you have flyers. I'm not against flyers. But make flyers highly visual, use
Right.
compelling, realistic images. As much as I love clip art, it's like a no-no. Again, some people will disagree. I don't like clip art. But again, I want to emphasize, somebody was like, no, there's realistic clip art, and then there's like that cartoon clip art. So there's different kind of clip art, right? So some of them is like, there's different kinds of clip art. But yeah, so to answer your question, maybe this overload of information belongs on a website. Maybe it belongs in a newsletter or a blog, right? So there's nothing wrong with flyers, but why not consolidate your programs into one flyer, put QR codes that direct people to larger bodies of text, of content, like on a web page, or right? So in other words, direct people to other like modalities, right? Whether it's a video, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a web page, whether it is a social media post. You can start with a sign with little pieces of information, something that's not overwhelming, and direct people to a larger to a larger body of literature or content on a different modality, like in some something different. That way they're not having this flyer with, again, using the word explosion, but a burst of information, which I think is overwhelming, and it's just too much. So that is my suggestion. And of course, I'm just saying that, like, there's nothing wrong with kind of like bouncing content using QR codes, which is great, or even if you don't want to use a QR code, but maybe using a tiny URL or bit.ly, or referring them to to a website. But I always think that a lot of times, and this includes me, sometimes we create a flyer and we have so much information, and sometimes it's not meant, maybe that's not the right piece of marketing, content, that piece of material is the wrong material for what you're doing, and that maybe it should be on something else. So what I'm thinking based on your question is, if you're having all these programs, consolidate them into one flyer, okay, with a little bit of language, little bit of words, something that is like a nice, attractive picture. And then, like, oh, click on this QR code for this event, click on this QR, or take a, go on this QR code for this event. And that way it kind of like goes into different directions. I'm thinking about, like, Choose Your Own Adventure. That was like a storybook I used to read in the 1980s, where, you go off into different directions. so that it creates a more like customized experience in a way. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And Mark, something you talked about there that I think also talks to another question that we had related with this, and this is something you and I was asking you about this morning. And so Desiree was asking, like, kind of even further than just how do how do you get the right information on there? How do you keep from competing with other things that are happening in the library? So maybe this would be, Desiree, I don't know if this would be where it would be, but something Mark had, and I'll share my screen.
I also want to say, someone talked about
ahead.
like surveys. So because I'm
yeah.
looking at the chat as well. So
Please.
in my 2019 book, I talked a lot about market research. I found that, and because I just wanted to mention this because like
go ahead.
this is basically Michaela talked about surveys. So just very quickly, I want to mention that all of the marketing activities that I'm involved with has been informed with data. So in other words, I do the survey, whether it's telephone survey, focus group, in person, I do it first, and the data that I get, that informs my marketing. So that's why my marketing is not upside down, but it's informed by market research. And I want to just mention, I find that in terms of surveys, the online questionnaires that we do are not as effective, because if we give somebody a link, they're not going to click it. And, so what we do at my library is we actually divide our questionnaires into mini questionnaires, and we print them on paper. And this was during the pandemic and even before the pandemic and post-pandemic. These mini questionnaires, which are on paper, have only 3 or 4 questions. And when something is in print and they're mini and they take 30 seconds to do, you get the data right away. And that data informs your marketing. And we do that for signage. We do that for our library instruction, information literacy classes. We do that for we do for every library service. And I am in an academic library, but you can transfer this for public libraries, any kind of libraries. If you do mini assessments, you do them on paper, you get the data right away. We have a library assistant complete it and put kind of enter the data online. You get that data. And that data, and if you do it in the form of a paper questionnaire with only 4 questions, it's immediate. And the reason why I'm not against online questionnaires, with an online questionnaire, you have to hope that they click on that link. And very often they lose the link and they're like, oh, or they forget about it. But with a paper questionnaire, you get the data right away. And I always get IRB approval for everything, because I always hope that, I might publish the results, I might present at a conference. But paper is great because paper is immediate. So I wanted to just answer that question because
That's great.
somebody asked that. So
no, that's awesome.
So I'm sorry,
Mark.
I went off topic. I apologize.
No. This is all about, this is all the topic. This is fantastic. Yeah. No, we're actually working on some surveys right now. And something that we've talked about is exactly that. Like, how do you get the people that are offline? How do you get the people that might not be as comfortable? Or just like you said, like, how do you just get more people to do the response? So this is absolutely fantastic. Something that Desiree was saying earlier was about how do you keep things from competing? So I want to show here, I'll show just my whole screen, you'll see my notes and everything. So Mark and I were talking about this right here, which is the signage locator map. So Mark, can you talk real quick about kind of how to use this? This is an awesome tool.
I think I included this in my book, but I also included it in 2 academic journal articles that I published in 2013 and 2014. So this is very easy. All you do is you either get the blueprints of your library, and if you don't, then just set up a PowerPoint or a Word document and put the floor by floor, just generally create a general, basic outline of what your floor looks like. This is one of the floors of our library. And then what you do is, to keep track of your signs, you place the approximate locations of where your signs are. And this is really important to, number one, keep track of your signs. keep track of how many signs you have, keep track of the types of signs and the general locations, and making sure that those signs are at decision points. So this is again, super easy thing to do. And when I talk about decision points, in user experience design, they talk about something called a node, and it's spelled N-O-D-E, or a decision point, or a bump point. And bump is spelled B-U-M-P. And basically, you want to be able to put a sign where a person makes a decision. So that means that, and again, really common sense. In like our signs before pre-2012, they were everywhere. They were random. But you want to be able to be very mindful about putting a sign where your user makes a decision. How do you do that? You observe your users, not in a creepy way. You observe them by like looking at, oh, so it's kind of common sense that when you go to the library, in my library, now a user will either go to the left and go into the elevator, or make a right and go up the stairs. Well, that where the library user diverges into those two, decision points, that's a great place to put a sign. And we have a bulletin board there. And that's where we have a sign, because that's where a place where a person would stop and either decide to walk up the stairs or take the elevator. So this is a very easy thing to do. Normally, your signs should be at service points. They should be, and your decision points would be, like at the bottom of a staircase, like when someone's waiting at the elevator. And sometimes you've got digital signs. So digital signs would be either at like service points. That's called a point of wait sign. So that means that a digital sign at a point of wait sign would have more text, because that decision point means that that person is waiting to be served at a service point, like the circulation desk or the reference desk. So they're probably going to be like standing there for a longer period of time. That means that would give you the affordance to have a sign with more text, because the library user would be, kind of waiting there. As that's called point of wait. Point of transfer means that's also a decision point where, like, think of it as like a thoroughfare in an airport, right? Thoroughfare in a hospital. So in my book, I talk about point of wait, point of transfer, and point of sale. So point of transfer, those kinds of signs would be where people go down long hallways. So you're not going to put a lot of text in a point of transfer, because a point of transfer is where you're going from one area of the library to another. So you're going to be like, people are moving. So again, think hallway in a hospital, or a thoroughfare in a train station, an airport. Those are called point of transfer signs. So those are also parts where where library users will make decisions. But those signs, you want them to be highly visual, but you don't want to have a lot of text because people don't have time to read it. Finally, point of sale. Those are the signs where the decision point would be at an end cap display. So for those of you who are in charge of merchandising, those are where you want to put signs at the end of an aisle, an end cap display. And yeah, for those kinds of signs, you'd want to have more text, because somebody is going to be engaging with that sign because they're going to be standing up. Does that make sense? I'm hoping that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, so it's all about like, where will your library user kind of stop and make a decision, and, like where they're going to engage in a sign. So I'm thinking, and again, I learned this by going through my library. I've been in my library for 15 years and, you get to know the specific decision points, because you're not only following users, but you're also trying to like practice being a user. So, and, you want to put yourself in the feet of users by observing them. Again, not in a creepy way, but in a very, casual way. But you also want to ask users questions. So that relates to semi-structured interviews as well as focus groups. You also want to engage in kind of creating these simple mini surveys. So I've done, there's so many different types of assessment. And one of my chapters is on signage research methods, which focuses on trying to use different types of assessment activities to really be able to get both qualitative and quantitative data from your users. I'm sorry if I went off topic.
No, Desiree, was that helpful in what you were saying about, like how do you get where do you put signs and how do you keep them competing? Yeah. You're welcome. Anybody's welcome to open their mic anytime too. Oh yeah, Desiree, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's super helpful. I love that map. If it's in the book, great. I've just started with the article, so I've got the book coming to me, but I think that's going to be really helpful to give us an overall view of kind of where things are at, rather than just looking at it from the ground level. So thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Yeah, because I think, Mark, you can agree that sometimes the first place people think of putting signs is, well, put them right on the door. That's where people go. But the decision people make to go to the door is open the door. And so they're usually not standing there reading signs. So, I mean, yes, there are door signs that make sense, but
yeah, I also think it's kind of ugly too.
Yeah.
I think like signs on doors and signs on furniture are pretty ugly. Now, my last chapter of the book talks about ADA, and there are ADA rules, and of course, like a lot of libraries can break ADA until they get caught. I mean, like it's only until you get caught or until you get fined. So a lot of libraries are not ADA compliant. And a lot of my colleagues are, they have the best of intentions, but they're not ADA compliant. Me personally, I think signs on doors and signs on furniture are pretty ugly, but I get it. It's practical to put a door on to put a sign on a door. I just think it's like much nicer to have it on a bulletin board or to have it on on a frame or on a sign holder. And, I know that a lot of people have glass covers, but there is a lot of literature that states that glare is not good, and that lamination is not good. I know lamination protects the signs, and glare is not good for for reading. So I would always emphasize try not to put things on furniture or on stick things to walls, and to have something a little bit nicer like an easel or a bulletin board. And it's more attractive. So it all depends on your budget. We don't have a budget, so everything that we do is really do it yourself. I work in a public university, and we really have no marketing person, no graphic designer, no professional software. So we just have me and a few other people. So.
And Mark, when you're talking about, people talk about snap frames and Demco, and now hours, Lisa, I think Mark, you would agree, hours and things on buildings and legally mandated, no smoking and those kind of things. Yeah, I think there's places for signs on doors for sure, especially when it has to go with, Mark, like when the building is closed. Well, yes, that's a different case than somebody, right?
Of course. I do want to mention, this is something very practical. So, during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, our building was closed. So I always want to mention this, and this is part of my elevator speech, that, library services never ended, just the building was closed. But, the library never closed, just the building. So when the building reopened, and during the pandemic, I was in Canada, I'm very, very fortunate that I'm a dual citizen. So I go back and forth all the time. When I came back to my campus, we had hundreds of those just horrible, social distance, 6 feet away, put on your mask, and they were everywhere. They were on the ceiling, the floor. It was literally like a sign explosion, and they were stuck on everywhere. Floor, ceiling, walls, everywhere. And I'm going to tell you, I got in trouble. I peeled them all off. I ripped them all off because they, what's the biggest problem? They were outdated. Because we no longer had a mask policy. Right. We no longer had a 6 feet social distance policy, and I ripped them off. And these were, very expensive, institutional signs. It felt so good to rip them off because they were outdated. There's nothing worse than outdated signs. So if you no longer have that 6 feet social distance, which I don't even know, I don't know what part of United States I'm in Canada right now, but I don't even know what part, even if we even have that anymore. And you still see this in organizations that, you know, masks are required. I don't know about you, but I don't know. I mean, I've returned to go back to, you know, Broadway shows. Nobody wears a mask at a Broadway show. Whereas, you know, several months ago, you had to bring in your vaccination certificate. You had to wear masks. Nobody wears masks at Broadway shows. Okay. And also another thing too, is almost nobody wears masks at the airport. Right. And you know, I'm going to like major cities and I'm looking, you know, almost nobody wears masks on the plane anymore. You know, so I'm just saying that sometimes those signs need to be removed, even though, you know, yeah, of course it's safe to have the masks. I get it. And I think one of the Broadway shows I wore 2 masks. I think I was one of the only people, you know, in the audience. And I don't know about other Broadway cities that have Broadway shows. I'm talking about New York City. And I'm telling you, nobody wore a mask but me in one of the shows. And so those signs become outdated, and they become not only redundant, but when the information is outdated, people ignore them and they become a waste of space. So my recommendation is remove them.
I think that's great.
I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, I can tell you, I'm on sabbatical for a whole year, and I'm going to return it towards the end of 2023. My chief has told me that those signs are still up. And it's just ridiculous that they're still there. In my university, which is the CUNY system, the City University of New York, they took away their mask mandate a long time ago, almost like a year ago. So, you know, those signs should have been removed. I don't know if any of you work in libraries where you still have those signs, get rid of them.
I see a couple in the chat. Yeah, said they still have some.
Again, it's wasted space, and especially for me, there's nothing worse than outdated information.
Yeah, so that's great. Sandy, you have a question or a point to make, please?
Hi, thank you very much. I just actually removed a mask sign in our library today, so guilty. No, but thank you. I wanted to ask a question. My library is the Warren Newport Public Library. We're in between Chicago and Milwaukee, and we have a growing population that speaks Spanish in our community. So we definitely have Spanish language collections. And I have a question about signage, because there are different views on our staff about labeling for Spanish language collections that they are only in Spanish. Yet I've heard perspectives that for staff who do not speak Spanish, it's challenging to fill displays and know what the content is. So I'm not sure if you had advice about this, or if anyone in the group would have advice about this, because I think from my communications perspective, I'm thinking that Spanish language should be prominent. But I like having English language on the sign too, and my opinion is differing from others on the staff.
I just, when it comes down to it, it's all about the user. And so you have to think about like, what would your library user want? So I just think that, you know, having too much language on one sign is again out of control, and just it's too much. So having separate signs in different languages is, I think it's very inclusive. So I would say yes. And I think that thinking of your user, and that's where market research comes in, right? It's all about, you know, the data that you get from the market research, and, you know, without guessing, you know, it's, of course, if you have a community in your library who are Spanish speakers, then I think it is expected to create Spanish signs, you know, in addition, and that I think that's really, really important. So thank you. By the way, that question comes up a lot. That, you know, and I think that, you know, it's more about quality, not quantity, but I think it's also being inclusive, and making sure that you serve your users. And, you know, if, again, to me, it's, yeah, I think you should have, if you have, you know, Spanish language books, then you should have signs that in Spanish that lead to those books.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Do you recommend having separate signs though?
Yes.
Okay, so that.
Yes, because again, think about it, as I mentioned before,
Yeah.
you know, jamming in all that content in one sign, especially I have a rule about no more than 5 words on a sign. I know it's very difficult to achieve, but
Yeah.
you know, but I mean, like, you don't need, and also read the signs out loud. And this is good practice, right? How can you say something in with the least words as possible? Because I believe, and I get this from my students, they don't want to read.
Right.
Students don't want to read. And I'm telling you, and I teach first year undergraduate students in a required information literacy course, and I teach Masters of Library Science students at 2 different graduate schools, and they tell me they don't want to read, which I think is ridiculous. But you know, and then thinking about, you know, if you go on, you know, Pew Research is wonderful, because you know, Pew has a lot of these amazing, you know, free data sets. You not only glean information by using, you know, primary sources of data from your library community, but using like secondary and tertiary, like statistical data, community survey data, Pew Research data, and then, you know, getting data from your own students or from your library community that, you know, people don't like to read, which is, you know, kind of sad. Then, you know, I would say that your signs should be sparse with words, highly visual, using compelling, realistic images. Not that I'm against clip art, but, you know, a lot of the research says, you know, that cartoon clip art is kind of, you know, not really taken as seriously as having a realistic, compelling image, in my opinion, and also in the research that I've done over many, many years. So, you know, having, you know, a sign in English and Spanish is inclusive of your community and your users. And I think that kind of putting them into one sign might just be too much. It might be just too crowded and too, I think it would be too crowded. That's what I believe.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Andy. Nicholas, you have a question.
Yeah, piggybacking off of the inclusivity of that, is there any good websites or software that you recommend to ensure that our signs are for low vision patrons, right? So the text is the specific size, the color contrast is there. So we, you know, just kind of like an audit that way.
So in my audit, I look primarily at language, at the marketing message, but there are free tools. There are tools that would measure, you know, the color contrast. According to ADA, the color contrast has to be 70% between the background and the foreground. And there are a lot of free tools that will help with again, the thing that comes to mind is contrast, but also using a typeface like a font that is sans serif or sans serif, because that's just, you know, it's just easier to read. I like serif. Serif is like Times New Roman. I like Times New Roman, but Times New Roman is used when you're doing an essay, when you're writing, you know, like you're writing a body of work. But sans serif or sans serif, like Arial, is just, you know, it's just easier to read. And someone's mentioned Canva. I love Canva. I have the free version of Canva. I love Canva. You know, I use Canva, and yeah. So there is software. But I think it's also, you know, doing a lot of user testing. We do a lot of usability testing to kind of see. But there are, just I want to be able to address your question. There are free tools on the web that will help determine color contrast. So, and I think just in general, having a very dark foreground font that would be black, which I think the HTML color code is like 6 zeros. I think it's 6 zeros. I'm always getting mixed up with the HTML color codes. And then having the background as white. And I don't know if the white is like X's. I forgot the HTML. Thank you. Sorry.
F's like Frank, yes.
You know, there's the hexacode, there's the RGB code, there's the HTML code. Those are all color codes. And I think that the simplest is having, and just in my view and my experience, and also in my research and in my opinion, is, you know, white background, and the font or the typeface that you're using would be, you know, like in black lettering. That's easiest to read. So for low vision, that would be, you know, ADA compliant. But, and I've seen, back in the 90s when there would be web pages that were, bright pink and bright yellow and bright green, it was really colorful, but, horrific to read. So I hope I'm answering your question, but I can always, I'm very happy to share my email, and I can definitely offer a lot of different resources that I use that are free on the World Wide Web that would provide information that relates to ensuring that your color contrast is at least 70%, and that that your signs are, again, ADA compliant. It is the last chapter of my book. But I also, so I just want to make sure to answer your question. But, for a lot of people have commented that the book is too small, and that it could, and I've noticed that in the reviews. And the only reason why the book is too small is because ALA Editions forced me to cut it in half. So that was, I could have gone on for a lot longer anyway.
Yeah, I would. Mark, I would have loved some larger photos of the examples too. Yeah, which it looks like they got real shrunk down. So it's, but they're great ones in there, and a lot of great tools in there. So yeah, Mark will share. I'll make sure that I'll get Mark's contact information, and everybody who's here will get a copy of that. We'll make sure that we'll get it to you. That would be awesome. What other questions or things do you all have for Mark? I have more too, but let me keep it open to what else. We've got a few, we've got about 10 minutes ish. So let me pause for a second, see if any other questions pop up, and then I'll throw mine up there. So Mark, something you were talking earlier about your user experience mapping, and I can share my screen for a second. This is just my handwritten stuff, so I don't know if anybody can read this, but so right in the middle of my screen, there was something you talked about with empathy mapping, which I thought was really cool, about how to do this as another part of a sign audit. So so putting things into a quadrant of says, thinks, feels, and does. And I have my notes here, but can you just walk us through this empathy map, if you, either based on what
I think that what's important is that there are different types of activities that you could give your user to get a sense of how they feel, right? Because user experience is not about websites. It's not only about websites, it's about feelings. It's about feelings. So there are different things like journey mapping, diaries, empathy mapping, which is, how the physical or virtual interface that the user is interacting with, how does it make them feel? Does it make them feel anxious, happy, scared, worried, lost, right? So a lot of those words are really helpful, and they help inform you when you're designing the physical and virtual spaces. So again, the physical spaces, when we think about that, it's service desks, furniture, wayfinding, the navigational paths as your user is trying to kind of navigate through the physical spaces. And I think empathy mapping, journey mapping, diary studies, and all of those types of user experience research methods, which are very much connected to signage and wayfinding methods, and I want to be able to answer your question, is trying to identify specific feelings as users navigate through physical and virtual spaces. And so we want to get a sense of what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and what they're experiencing. So in other words, what I think that an empathy map is very similar to a customer journey map, which is used in marketing, right? Customer journey map is used in marketing, where we want users to document, like in a diary, the steps that they take as they're trying to fulfill a task, and what they're feeling as they are completing that task. So all of the things that I'm mentioning are all part of task completion exercises, which is also part of UX. And that's one of the chapters of the book. And that's all directly connected to signage research methods as well as wayfinding research. So it's not, I mean, of course, you can use, you can use card sorting. Card sorting is very classic. It relates to, website hierarchy. You can use different types of usability tests. What I've done A/B testing. A/B testing is another type of UX method, which I've done for signs, where you give 2 different iterations of the sign and you ask users to choose which variation of the sign they prefer, right? So that's called A/B testing. In terms of empathy mapping, you want to be able to ask users as they complete an exercise, as they complete a task, to document, which I'm all about documenting. I document everything on my phone, everything. Again, in true, librarian style, I document everything. I think empathy mapping is trying to document the various steps in which they complete a particular task and to document how they feel. So it's more about feeling now, and that I would say that's very much connected to customer journey mapping. It's also connected to writing a diary. And when you, and it's highly qualitative, which I love, because, qualitative methods, which is what my dissertation is a qualitative research study. So the reason why I love qualitative research is that the data is richer. It's richer and it is more nuanced, and it has a lot more dimension, as opposed to a simple, a written questionnaire or an online questionnaire. I think that empathy mapping really identifies the steps involved, where how you're getting inside the emotions of a user. So I think that's perfect when somebody's trying to find a book, or they're trying to complete a particular task in a library, trying to get from point A to point B. And you're trying to identify how they feel, right? And I can tell you, my building is circular. And everyone gets lost, including me. So that's not good. And I'm telling you, it's a very confusing building. And a lot of library buildings are intimidating, confusing, overwhelming, and they really provoke a lot of library anxiety. Library anxiety is a real thing. So I'm hoping I'm kind of addressing how I'm interpreting empathy mapping, which I talk about in the signage research methods chapter.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Desiree had one other question in the chat. It was, do you about examples of signage policies? And I know there are some examples of signage policies.
It's a chapter in my book. It's a chapter in my book. I can always email you the signage policy we have at my library, but there are, so a signage policy can be as small or big as you wish, right? So same thing with a marketing plan. I'm doing a webinar next month on marketing plans. Your marketing plan, like your signage policy, can be as small as big as you wish, right? So one of the chapters of my book really focuses on different signage policies. So again, the book is not expensive, and I'm very happy to email any of you if you'd like to have like a sample of what a signage policy looks like. But it really depends on how detailed you want it, and you can update your signage policy once a year. You can update it twice a year. It all depends on you. And again, it's a way of creating something. And I want to just distinguish that, like, guidelines, in my view, guidelines are flexible. A policy is a little bit more strict. A lot of people use the word synonymously, but the way that I'm interpreting it is guidelines are, flexible. Policy is a little bit stricter. I'm happy to send you a sample of the library signage policy that we have at my library.
No, I think that's great, Mark. Thank you. Yeah, Desiree, did that help? Is that helpful? Yeah. Mark, one other thing, we just have a couple of minutes. Just in the ADA chapter, there was a sentence that I thought was really interesting, a phrase that you used that was really interesting, and it said, "You should allow for user error without penalty." Do you remember that? And can you explain what that means?
I do want to say,
maybe.
So the book the book was published at the end of 2021. So some of the things I don't necessarily remember, but
Yeah.
I think what's important is that we're humans and we make
Mhm.
mistakes, and we definitely make mistakes. And, there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with what I've written in the book, and that's fine. But I think that, a lot of us are not ADA compliant, and it's not that we're, that we're mean or we're vicious or but I think it's that, the library, we haven't been fined, we haven't been caught, and a lot of us make mistakes. And I think what's important is that we're well-intentioned. We want the best for our users, but we want to be able to think like, could they read that? Is that readable? Is that legible? And so we want to try to show empathy. And I think user experience is all about empathy. It's all about, what do you think our users how will they interpret that sign or that promotional material? So that's why I always emphasize, read everything out loud. And in terms of human error, of course, there's going to be human error because we're humans. And if we're creating our own, marketing material, our own signs, and we're composing our own press releases and we're writing our own copy, we want to make sure that, not to be too hard on ourselves, that we're going to make mistakes. And as long as you think about signs and websites and all marketing material as living documents that are constantly being updated and revised, then you know that your intentions are good and you're going to constantly improve. And so I think that's important, that we're constantly going to improve our services, our signage, our resources, and so I think human error is expected. I think it's like, it's a normal thing. I mean, we're humans, and I mean, we totally make mistakes, and our users sometimes may misinterpret things, and so we just have to fix them. And that's why it's really important to constantly do assessment, constantly be involved in assessment. Don't just do it once, but constantly ask your users questions all year round. We do our mini, I talked about, for those of you who came late, we do our mini surveys throughout the year constantly. And we have, again, our mini questionnaires are literally 4 or 5 questions in different service areas. So, online tutorials, our information literacy classes, our reference service, our collection development, our website, our signage. And when we do that throughout the year, and we're constantly collecting data, we're constantly making revisions, and we're constantly, hopefully, improving library services and improving user experiences. I hope.
That's awesome, Mark. What a great way to end. What a fantastic note. We could talk about this, I know, forever. We can have discussions about this further in the group, on the Facebook group, for everybody who's part of that. That would be great. Mark, what's your email address? So
I'm sharing it right now.
Okay, share it in the chat.
Mark Aaron.Polger@csi.cuny.edu. And that is, so again, markaaron.polger. And also I have a website, markaaronpolger.com. I am on Facebook, obviously. I'm also on on Twitter and Instagram. But so my professional website is, again, the best way of contacting me, but also my email, markaaron.polger@csi. I am on sabbatical from my full-time job, but I still check my email every day. So
that's great. Mark, can you pick a number between 1 and 32? I want to get somebody a book for our next month, please.
Okay, 25.
Okay, so let's see. So Yvonne Redding. Yvonne, you win a copy of Using Behavioral Science and Marketing by Nancy Harhut, which is our book for next month. I have not asked Nancy yet, but she may be able to join us or provide some input. But in any event, we'll have 1 month from now, we'll have another conversation. Mark, thank you again. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. Yes, thank you for inviting me.
And thank you, everybody. Yeah. Mark. Yeah. Anything else, Mark, that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I am working on another book, but it's
Yeah.
coming along very slowly because I'm also having the issue of my academic advisor who's expecting me to work on my dissertation. And yeah, so that's the only problem when your dissertation doesn't match the book that you're working on. So, but I will be working on that.
We'll look forward to that very much, and maybe we'll have you back to talk about that. But
would be
thank you
great.
again, everybody, for joining today. It was wonderful to see everyone.
And
And
thank you for
you'll-
coming this afternoon. It was I love the questions, so please reach out to me if you have more questions.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
And I'll follow up with everybody. If you have your email, you'll get an email, you'll get a copy of the transcript and all that stuff. But thank you, everybody, for joining this month. Great
Yeah.
to see you again.
Thanks, Chris.
Mark.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. Bye.
All right. Well, thanks all. We'll talk to y'all soon.
Okay,
Bye.
bye. Take care. Bye.